Hello everybody, it's Mrs. Pound and we are studying Chapter 19 on Ecology from BJU Biology's 4th edition. Today we're working in Section 19A, the ecosystem, and we're going to take a look at subsection 19.2b, Biotic Factors. So our objectives today will be to clarify the relationship between the terms population, biotic factors, and ecosystem, and to contrast consumers and producers and give several examples. So we've been taking a look at ecosystems, which is a system where living things interact with non-living things. And we took a look at the non-living things last time, which are abiotic factors. Today we're going to take a look at the biotic factors. These are the living things or population in an ecosystem. So today is focused on living things. And we're going to be taking a look at populations. This is all the members of the same type of living thing within an area or community. So this is one species. So in the background here, we see a population of prairie dogs. So that is a population. A population is only one species. That population can have a population density. This is a measure of the number of individuals from a population in a defined area of space. And in the background here, I have an anthill. And that's because in that anthill, there would be a pretty dense population of ants in that given area. You could imagine if we kicked that open that there would be ants all over the place. And when we're taking a look at population densities, we find that there are a lot of plants. They seem to be very dense in most areas, but then the top predators, say like owls and things like that, there tend to be just very few of those. They seem to be less dense. So we're taking a look at the number of in a population and dividing that by the area, much like density where we take the mass over the volume. So it's a division type problem. That's why it's called density. Now, all the populations in an ecosystem are called the biotic community. So here we have a community. So each population you could think of as like a job. And there are many jobs in a community. So there are many different species in a community, like there are many different jobs in a community, such as a village or a city. We also take a look at the biodiversity. This is a measure of the scope or range of living organisms in an environment. It's the number of different species within a system. So looking at this picture of a field, this is very biodiverse because there are a lot of different flowers here. If there was just one type of plant, it would not be very biodiverse. And the more biodiversity is, the healthier an ecosystem will be, because if one species is stressed, then the whole system does not become as stressed if there are other food sources. But if there is just one species in this field and something happens, like a disease wipes it out, then that whole entire ecosystem would be in trouble. In an ecosystem, there are producers. This is an organism that produces its own food, a photosynthetic or chemosynthetic organism, which is an autotroph. And so in the background here, there are trees and grasses, and all of those perform photosynthesis. So they are producers because they produce the food for the ecosystem. Now, deep down in the ocean trenches, there are actually bacteria that do not require sunlight, that perform chemosynthesis, that provide those resources for those particular ecosystems. There are also consumers. This is an organism that takes materials from the ecosystem and it cannot make its own food, such as this rabbit that is eating clover. Now, rabbits are herbivores because they eat only plants. So this particular consumer is an herbivore. There's also primary productivity in an ecosystem. This is the rate of photosynthesis carried on by an ecosystem's producer. So, how productive are those producers is basically what that's taking a look at for primary productivity. We also take a look at ecological pyramids. This is a diagram showing the quantitative relationships between the biomass or the quantities of organisms in an ecosystem. So here is an ecological pyramid, and we can see at the bottom are the producers, and they would have the most mass because they provide the food for everything else. Just above them, just above the grass, I have a grasshopper, and it says primary consumer because grasshoppers eat the grass. And there would be fewer grasshoppers, but if you've ever walked in a field when the grasshopper's out, there's still quite a few around. So they would be less numerous than the producers. Then there would be the secondary consumer. So primary, secondary, and that is a mouse. And that mouse might be eating the grasshoppers. And that mouse eating those grasshoppers, it is a secondary consumer, and you're probably less likely to see a mouse in the field. There are fewer of them. And then finally, there's the tertiary consumer, and that is the owl. So primary, secondary, tertiary. Tertiary basically means third. It means third. And an owl, you might see one of those. You might not even see it at all, even though you may know it's there, especially because they are nocturnal. They come out at night. But there might just be one in a very large area. And so you can see the biomass goes down as we go up the pyramid. So biomass is the total quantity of living material produced by an ecosystem. So the biomass would include everything: the mass of the sheep, the grass, the trees in the background, all of the insects that we can't necessarily see, all of those mice we can't see that may be underground, all the worms, and all those types of things would be included in the biomass. So here again, the biomass at each level decreasing as we go up, and they would all be included in the area's biomass. Now, trophic levels are a particular step in an ecological pyramid that shows the flow of energy through a food chain. So as we go up this pyramid, this is actually a food chain, and we'll be writing that out here in a little bit. But it shows the energy flow. The energy is flowing upwards, and you'll notice that the energy is decreasing as we go up that food chain. Also, these are names of trophic levels. So producer, primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer. We could also call the grasshopper an herbivore. We could call the mouse and the owl carnivores, and the mouse would be a first level carnivore, and the owl a second level carnivore. So an animal that preys on an herbivore is called a first level carnivore. So we're going to say this mouse in particular is eating grass and seeds, and that has been caught by this fox. So the fox is a first level carnivore in my example. So we can see again that this mouse is a first level carnivore. The type of organism always at the base or bottom of an ecological pyramid is a producer. So these must be at the bottom because they provide the food for the rest of the food chain. So a food chain is a representation of the nutritional relationships between organisms in an ecosystem. So if we take a look at this pyramid, we can produce this food chain from it. We start with the grass. The energy from the grass goes to the grasshopper. So the arrow always points in the direction of energy flow, okay? What is eating the previous thing? Then from the grasshopper, the energy goes to the field mouse. And from the field mouse, the energy goes to the owl. And we can see that in this: producer, grass, grasshopper, field mouse, owl. Now, the amount of energy lost between two levels of the food chain is 80 to 90%. And we can see this from our energy here. Each time we've lost 90% here, we've lost another 90%. So 90% on this pyramid is lost as we go up the food chain. The energy losses between the steps in a food chain are due to some parts of the organism are uneaten. These unused parts may contain energy that is lost from the food chain. We see this squirrel eating perhaps a nut or an acorn. It doesn't eat the whole thing. It doesn't eat the shell. It doesn't eat the outside. So that is some energy that is lost. Respiration, excretions, and secretions contain energy that is also lost. As these athletes are running, they are performing cellular respiration, and there is energy lost in that process. Also, they are sweating and losing energy through those types of activities as well. And much of the energy a consumer ingests is also unusable, and that it cannot be converted to usable forms. So here's a cow pie. It comes out. And it is unused, and there is some energy in there because dung in some areas is dried out and then burned. So there still is energy there, but it was not used by the cow. Now, another part of the food chain and the energy pyramid has to do with detritus, and this is dead organic matter, like this tree stump. And you can see on the tree stump that there are decomposers. This is an organism that breaks down dead organic material into forms that can be used by other organisms. A very important part of the ecosystem, because otherwise there would be dead material laying everywhere, and there would be organic material locked up in there. There would be nutrients that could not be reused if it was not released by the decomposers. So some organisms that are part of the detritus food chain are insects, worms, lobsters, shrimps, crayfish, catfish, and vultures. And these are found at all levels of the food chain. They decompose any type of organism. Now, a food web is a method of illustrating multiple nutritional relationships and interactions between populations in an ecosystem. This is an example of a food web. Basically, it's all the food chains shown in an area. And the reason we make food webs is to realize that there are multiple things that eat berries. Usually a food chain is just not the berries are eaten by the green fly by the ladybug by the dragonfly by the frog, by the snake, by the buzzard. It doesn't always there's not just one food chain in an ecosystem, and usually something like berries is eaten by more than one thing, and those things that eat the berries can be eaten by more than one thing, like the grasshopper and the titmouse. So this shows all of the relationships in an area. And just like the food chain, notice in a food web that the arrows always point in the direction of the energy flow. So our objectives today were to clarify the relationship between the terms population, biotic factors, and ecosystem, and contrast consumers and producers and give several examples. So don't forget your 5 questions in your notes and to continue watching this video to answer the questions at the end.